Hey baby, I've got something really fun for you today. You know how I'm often complaining that, oh, whoops. No, don't do that to me. For fuck's sake. Anyway, you know how I'm always complaining that, because engineers get used to being able to apply their... because anyone in a STEM field essentially gets rewarded by utilitarian capitalism, and there's not a lot of emphasis on humanities. A lot of culture, at least, like global capitalist culture, supports this attitude of derisiveness towards humanities, and doesn't see having a grounding in things like, like making fun of a literature degree or an arts degree for not being employable, but then they Dunning-Kruger themselves. They get confident in their own ability, and they don't know what they don't know, become upset and irritated by what they don't know, or what forces them to sit with ambiguous stuff. And that's why you get people like Pat just focusing on like what you can get out of the technology of AI, rather than looking at the environmental impacts it costs to achieve not very much, and stuff that isn't very widely useful yet in terms of actually like replacing people for realizing concrete goals, and also like the other little social humanitarian consequences of not paying people for their work, ignoring copyright law, really harming the environment, forcing people out, or pushing an adoption strategy because you're scared of like the Minsky effect or whatever coming into play, scared of your bubble popping. This idea that since normally maths is black and white and I can achieve these ends, why do I also have to respect something like, the attitude I complain about where people are like, oh, AI lets me be an artist, and, artists are kind of gatekeeping the ability to do art. This kind of frees that up, like weird attitudes like that. Turns out, this isn't just me. Not only is it not just me, people have written about it at length, and someone on Blue Sky had this linked in a whatever, had this linked, and I dug it up, and now I'm going to share it with you. Someone who's actually like got some numbers crunched, so that's fantastic. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, there was a train passing. I had to close the window. So this is a New York Times Magazine article called Engineering Terror by David Berreby. It was published September 10, 2010. They say they believe in freedom and share our values. They say a few bad apples don't bring down judgment on their entire kind. Don't be fooled. Though they walk among us with impunity, they are, in the words of Henry Farrell, a political scientist at George Washington University, a group that is notoriously associated with terrorist violence and fundamentalist political beliefs. They are engineers. Before I continue anything else, they say a few bad apples don't bring down judgment on their entire kind, like the guy's being facetious or whatever, but bad apples spoil the barrel. Like, this is... You leave a bad apple in with the other apples, the rot spreads. That's a thing. That's just... I feel like people are just like, oh, it's just one bad apple. It's like, it's in a fucking barrel with the other apples. Like, culture is an important thing. Like, you need to be able to critically... You need to be able to say that people, yeah, they're not evil, they're not totally bad, but they did a bad thing, okay? You cannot be in there with the other apples if the apples are there for the purpose of, say, consumption or policing. Like, it's... Get your shit together. So Farrell, of course, was kidding. He posted that comment on a blog shortly after Umar Farouk Abdulmuttalab, confessed Al-Qaeda operative and engineering student, tried to blow up an airliner over Detroit last winter. So this must have been 2009, unless winter was just earlier in the year and he's saying at the start of the year. Who knows? Northern hemispheres are weird. But the satire was rooted in a statistical fact. In the ranks of captured and confessed terrorists, engineers and engineering students are significantly overrepresented. Maybe that's a numerological accident. The sociologist Diego Gambetta and the political scientist Stefan Hertog don't think so. Each month, Gambetta and Hertog's database grows. Last December, Abdulmuttalab's attempt over Detroit. In February, Joseph Andrew Stack, a software engineer, crashed his plane into IRS offices in Austin, Texas. In March, John Patrick Battle, an engineering grad student, opened fire at an entrance to the Pentagon. In early May, Faisal Shahzad, Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and Engineering, was arrested at Kennedy Airport for a failed attempt to set off a bomb in Times Square. Also in May, Faiz Muhammad, a civil engineer, was caught at Karachi's airport with batteries and an electrical circuit hidden in his shoes. And going back, of the 9/11 conspirators who had been educated beyond high school, 8 studied engineering. As this list suggests, the phenomenon isn't confined to Muslims or Middle Easterners. I mean, Ted Krasinski is a really famous white guy doing this who had obvious stuff going on. But you look at any of the mess that's happening with, Muscolites now, and it's... I mean, competencies vary, but the cultural root of the problem is there, although I don't think this is... they're making a slightly different argument to me here. In a paper published last year in the European Journal of... Oh, I see. Because I've used the 12-foot to access this. It's jumbled the text a bit. I wonder... In a paper published last year in the European Journal of Sociology, Gambetta and Hertog argued that the engineer-terrorist connection is part of the answer. It is a new window onto what Gambetta calls the hidden logic of society. Though the difference in susceptibility is very small, it's like saying the probability that you will be struck by lightning is 1 in a million, Gambetta says, and the probability for an engineer to be struck by lightning is 4 in a million. It is, as they say, real. Yeah, that doesn't read quite as well as it... Sorry, it doesn't speak quite as well as it reads. And it looks like that's actually the second paragraph in this little set. As this list of engineering terrorists suggests, the phenomenon isn't confined to Muslims or Middle Easterners. In fact, thinking in terms of religion, nation, or class has failed to explain why, for example, out of thousands of normal acting sons of middle-class, moderate Muslim families from Nigeria, apparently only Abdulmuttalab took the dive into terrorist plots. On the familiar social science instruments, he looks the same as social science instruments. Oh, okay, measurements used by social science studies, social... not two separate words. He looks the same as countless non-terrorists. What are we missing? In a paper published last year in the European Journal of Sociology, Gambetta and Hertog argue that the engineer-terrorist connection is part of the answer. It is a new window into what Gambetta calls the hidden logic of society. For their recent study, the two men collected records on 404 men who belonged to violent Islamist groups active over the past few decades, some in jail, some not. Had those groups reflected the working-age populations of their countries, engineers would have made up about 3.5% of the membership. Instead, nearly 20% of the militants had engineering degrees. When Gambetta and Hertog looked only at the militants whose education was known for certain to have gone beyond high school, close to half, 44%, had trained in engineering. Among those with advanced degrees in the militants' homelands, only 18% are engineers. this is an illustration. I thought it was a photo at first, also because this is 5 in the morning and I shouldn't be awake. But yeah, illustration Owen Freeman. It is creepy as hell. The two authors found the same high ratio of engineers in most of the 21 organizations they examined, including Jemaah Islamiyah in Southeast Asia and Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the Middle East. Sorting the militants according to their 30 homelands showed the same pattern. Engineers represented a fifth of all militants from every nation except one, and nearly half of those with advanced degrees. One seemingly obvious explanation for the presence of engineers in violent groups lies in the terrorist's job description. Who, after all, is least likely to confuse the radio with the landing gear, as Gambetta puts it, or the green wire with the red? But if groups need geeks for political violence, then engineering degrees ought to turn up in the rosters of all terrorist groups that plant bombs, hijack planes, and stage kidnappings, and that's not the case. Gambetta and Hertog found engineers only in right-wing groups, the ones that claim to fight for the pious past of the Islamic fundamentalists or the white supremacy America of the Aryan nations. Founder, Richard Butler, engineer. Or the minimal, pre-modern US government that Stack and Bettel extolled. This is, the same thing. You know, you go back to what you know when it's something, so when it comes to like social and humanities, like that fantasy of the 1950s nuclear family, women should be in the home, women in the workplace, or like brown people in the workplace, forces me to think about other people's experience or practice my empathy or whatever I'm not good at. Wider cultural values in terms of capitalism as well, but right-wing groups love their authoritarian, on ambiguous topics one person calls the shots. Like, you don't have to think about that, you only have to think in black and white type stuff. It should be embarrassing if you're well-rounded, but you know, Musk and fucking Zuck definitely do not have fine art in their collections that they like and understand. It's just fucking money laundering if they have any art at all. Back to this article. Among communists, anarchists, and other groups whose shining ideal lies in the future, the researchers found almost no engineers. Yet these organizations mastered the same technical skills as the right-wingers. Between 1970 and 1978, for instance, the Baader Meinhof gang in Germany staged kidnappings, assassinations, bank robberies, and bombings. 17 of its members had college or graduate degrees, most in law or the humanities. Not one studied engineering. The engineer mindset, Gambetta and Hertog suggest, might be a mix of emotional conservatism and intellectual habits that prefers clear answers to ambiguous questions. The combination of a sharp mind with a loyal acceptance of authority. Do people become engineers because they are this way? Or does engineering work shape them? It's probably a feedback loop of both, Gambetta says. It's a slight oversimplification because the broader culture is also a thing, but yeah. You get a feedback loop, you get your little silo of, well, I'm intelligent and objective, therefore, that same bullshit. And you see the problem exacerbated now that the right-wing investment in loud, obnoxious lobbying has really paid off, because you get a combination of emotional conservatism and authoritarian bootlicking widespread, because it's also become consumable culture and something to distract from suffering under capitalism or, getting things. Economic frustration also matters, Gambetta says. In their sample of militants, there was only one homeland out of 30 in which engineers were less common, Saudi Arabia, where engineers have always had plenty of work. But engineers' peculiar cognitive traits and dispositions made them slightly more likely than accountants, waiters, or philosophers to react to career frustration by adopting violent right-wing beliefs. Also, if you don't have to engage with why you're doing things or the end result of your things, if you're not future-minded, as they said about the anarchists and communists over here, fixated on the past rather than on the future. You're not exercising those, like, whenever I get into an argument or a quote-unquote debate with, for example, Dinky about, like, how it would play out with my anarchist or my communist ideals, and people knee-jerk react by shooting whatever little holes they can, because the idea that you can make the world you're in, it's like recency bias, right? And then also like a bit of just like the sense of inevitability, especially if you don't struggle in the world that currently exists, that things were fine, I'm getting what I was promised, like you work hard and things pay off. And then so like when you're frustrated in that, it's this big explosion of they haven't had to consider their place as a part of society, the overall trend of things. You just want to focus on what's important to you right in front of you and not consider your place in a group. You don't have to consider what you work for, what you work to enjoy. Like, if your job becomes obsolete, can you amuse yourself? And engineers can do that. Like, take up game development. That's probably the highest pursuit of all software engineering, besides like other engineering. Like the guys who do regular engineering should be getting into trains if they wind up with time on their hands, right? Trains. And trains as a beacon of like public good, immaculate. If you're a software engineer, the highest expression of your job is game dev. It shouldn't be that you need to just like ignore the consequences of dropping bombs on people all the time to keep trucking away that work. You should get some satisfaction and some contribution to culture out of it, and it should not be fucking like loser crybaby gamergate bullshit. You should have the satisfaction of making something and exercising your brain in those creative ways that come with it, like in an arena that you understand and can handle. Self-expression and that idea of being valued for something other than bean counting is so important. At least, like, you think accountants are technically bean counters, but they're dealing with people all the time. They're dealing with people's problems all the time. You're exposed to other ideas. Philosophers, honestly, mixed bag there, but I've digressed, and I might be wrong, maybe they have more to say. William A. Wolfe, a former president of the National Academy of Engineering, is, no surprise, no fan of the Gambetta-Hertog theory. If you have 1 million coin flips, he says, it's almost certain that somewhere in those coin flips there will be 20 heads in a row. The sample of militants Gambetta and Hertog used was simply too small for them to be sure they hadn't stumbled into a meaningless numerical accident, he says. The theory, according to Wolfe, misrepresents what engineers are about. A person who is rigid, he says, is a bad engineer. Yeah, that's true, but it's not like a lot of jobs reward people problem solving, Oh. How do I get the next page? No. And I don't think the coin flip analogy is very good in this, because if you're talking about the choice to do something extreme and step outside of what is normal even for you, then there are only so many human paths to that. And you see, like, the difference between being radicalized by the past versus being radicalized by the future. The idea that you can have all of these different walks of life being radicalized in a future-minded way, but being radicalized in a right-wing fashion is strongly correlated with these people. This dismissal is quite petty and superficial, and honestly, evidence of that same emotional rigidity, mental flexibility, problem solving. If you don't have that, you are a bad engineer, but you're not required to have good emotional regulation to be an engineer, especially if your way of regulating yourself is by coming back to the same types of problems and working through it and like soothing yourself that way, treating it like a craft, like knitting or something. All of those little accomplishments that build up to a finished project, and then having that source of social and material validation taken away from you if you lose your job or it's threatened in some way, That's me getting sidetracked again. I forgot what I was doing. Oh yeah, how do I get this full article? Why did I lose halfway through? I don't want subscription options. I don't want a free account. Can I just try again? Hang on, baby, let me see if I can get around this. Oh, so embarrassing turn of events. That was actually the end of the article. I thought that there would be more data and like citations and stuff. But we can look up, obviously, the guy whose research the article was all about in the first place. And it looks like there were replies to that article as well. Weird to me that these guys are focused on Islamic radicals, although I guess in the early 2000s, like, everybody was obsessed with the World Trade Center, but I feel like, yeah, I mean, look at my dad, you know? There's someone who really wanted there to be a right answer to things, and deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity and his emotions. Gambetta and Hertog write about a particular mindset among engineers that disdains ambiguity and compromise. Yeah, that's also let's see. That's where typing has made me a worse speller. Okay, letters regarding the article Engineering Terror. I am not going to comment on the statistics and methodology of Gambetta and Hertog's analysis, but their description of the engineer's mindset is off base, behind the times, and deserves clarification. Most leading universities in the US are cultivating thinking skills, completely opposite to what they state as a preference for clear answers to ambiguous questions. The goal of my own school, and I know that we are not alone in this, is to produce whole-brain thinkers. We want to produce engineers who are firmly grounded in analysis, logic, and rational thinking, but who also have intuitive and metaphorical thinking skills, the kind that open up new avenues of thought. Today's problems relate to energy, sustainability, security, and global health. They require engineering and people with the right skills to tackle them. A visit to any leading American university will show the engineering students leading the way across campus in many of these areas. Bless his heart, this is the dean of a school of engineering. Like, yeah, this has always been the goal, and well-rounded engineers who have an appetite for using their brain in other ways and taking their skills out of engineering and into humanities and hobbies and interests exist. They have always existed. It's just that of those who despise expanding themselves that way, or are just not very good at it and then break down later, they do subscribe to this, clear answers to ambiguous questions, emotional conservatism. So if there were more whole brain thinkers who were immune to things like, the tech startup cult, the AI scam NFTs, people who had taste and stuff, and they could look at the people who don't have, the thinking skills, who are inflexible, who do lash out, who do Gamergate. Actually, what year was Gamergate? ...2014 and 2015. So this guy hadn't seen that yet. Like, and I know those guys don't all have jobs, but a lot of them would tend to think of themselves and idealize and venerate engineering and STEM stuff because, again, utilitarian capitalism, above other fields of study. And that's cultural promotion, but it's also just like the familiar, the that lack of ambiguity again. What was I? When I started 2 sentences ago, I had a goal that I was talking towards, and now I've lost it. Sorry. I mean, look, Mr. Artino isn't wrong. This is like the ideal engineer, someone who is actually a sophisticated tertiary student who is going to go out in life and be comfortable and recognize the value of other people's work and be able to contribute not just in their narrow range of expertise, but to appreciate other people's expertise and see how that comes together as a whole, contributing to not only to a culture of scientific thinking and progression rather than regressing. But that's not what we're dealing with now. What we've been seeing for a long time, the last 20 years, is the gig economy stuff, the contract worker stuff, the lack of opportunities, the undermining of funding or respect for things like arts and literature, and just being nice to people who are worse off than you. There's been an escalation, I feel, of the kind of moralizing poverty, like it being a moral failing kind of thing, because even like the underdog geek from back in the day, the person who used to be the loser, being able to make it like a tech startup style, like it's just been more of that kind of bootstrap myth. There was a loud upset on Wikipedia ages ago now, but a lot of I think it was when they were like first like doing funding campaigns and stuff, like advertising those on the page when you land on them, and a lot of the guys who edit the like Wikipedia moderators or content contributors or whatever were saying that it would cost less if you just got rid of the quote-unquote useless articles about things like fashion and fashion through the ages, or like what was happening on runways lately or whatever. And there's a huge amount of history, technique, skill, artisanal craft, and trade status, hierarchical social information, cultural information in those articles about fashion, in those articles about historical fashion, the development of fashion, modern fashion, textiles. I mean, like textiles is foundational to a lot of modern computing, but there was this attitude that it was frivolous and therefore it could be cut off. It was dispensable. Like they were in a position as your average objective person to arbitrate what was and what wasn't worthwhile knowledge. It would be nice if your average engineer was a Kiran who took an interest in things that weren't his own special interest and appreciated the skill and craftsmanship that went into them, and was just like, well, that's not my space, but it's cool. Also, I don't know what you're talking about right now. If you send me the thing to read about it, I will learn about it, and then I'll decide if I'm like in a position to have an opinion or not. So, bless Mr. Atino, but I don't agree. Next person. I enjoyed David Berreby's essay, but as an engineer, I naturally got stuck on the quote from William A. Wolfe. If you have 1,000,000 coin flips, it's almost certain that somewhere in those coin flips there will be 20 heads in a row. My engineer's sense of numeracy was immediately tickled. After a minute or two in the calculator, I flushed out the actual figure. Flip a true coin 1,000,000 times and you will have a 60% chance of seeing 20 heads in a row. Quite likely, but hardly a certainty. With your August 22 pain to fact-checking fresh in my mind, The Right Stuff by Virginia Heffernan, it occurs to me that perhaps both new and old media could put engineers to work editing copy to analyze things like this in the future. By keeping those potential terrorists occupied with more mundane matters, we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Or is it 3? So hard to remember. Mark Nelson, Eric Johnson School of Engineering, Computer Science, University of Texas. Not a dean, but definitely the sort of nitpicker I prefer. Look at this.
Pian.
Pian. Okay, pronounced that completely wrong. Yeah, honestly, like, I mean, that whole thing, I read it, and I'm reading these now, they're formatted well, there's not even, like, weird grammatical tenses and stuff. I miss the days when people paid proofreaders, and it wasn't all just about headlines. Like, there was some sort of ego attached to having a nice functional article that read well. So, cool. So they had basically a for and against. Oh, yes. Smith, 24th February 2025. Wow. Well, that's published online though, so who knows when it was actually written. We have been here before. Reflections on Engineering and Authoritarianism. We write as members of the boards of Engineering Studies and the International Network of Engineering Studies, INES, and as current and former Editors-in-Chief of Engineering Studies. The United States research and education apparatus was thrown into utter chaos in the days following the inauguration of the 47th
United States Research and
of the 47th President of the United States. The new administration called for a total freeze on the flow of federal funding, backed down only after a district judge halted its implementation and spoke positively about the lawsuit that 22 states had filed against it. Well, this is... Yep. Non-governmental research employees involved in... So this is not about the correlation between engineers and authoritarian terrorist pursuits necessarily, but about the Board of Engineering journals and people in scholarly and academic spaces in general resisting authoritarianism. In any case, apolitical and politically opportunistic engineers are certainly not just associated with right-wing authoritarian regimes. We find them in left-wing regimes, colonial regimes, and liberal democracies too. In colonial regimes, most engineers, consciously or unconsciously, advocate the ideologies of modernization and of the capitalist mode of existence. They play an important role in the uncritical adoption of artifacts developed in the metropolises and become important in a kind of invited imperialism. Engineers can also be shapeshifters. We often find them refashioning themselves to survive or benefit from regime changes. I'm very interested in these citations, but it just, you can see in the corner. Can you see in the corner? Anyway, it shows the DOI link, but not just like the name and place. We see something similar happening currently in how engineering associations are responding to the current crisis. Some celebrated the new administration's victory as a boon for engineering, given its promises to expand technology and infrastructure. The IEEE spectrum focused on the administration's potential positive impacts on particular technology areas, including AI and cryptocurrency, without attention to the impacts of new policy on the people who research and create them. ABET, the institute that accredits U.S. engineering programs, ditched its DEI criteria, saying that doing so prioritizes long-term effectiveness. It doesn't, because DEI gives meritocracy a chance to exist outside of unconscious bias and or just blatant discrimination. None that we could find, however, publicly decried the dismantling of DEI and related programs. History clearly shows that it is naive to think that even engineers who try to remain apolitical and offer technocratic advice are immune to purges. Yeah. So let me roll back. So we can take some comfort in knowing that we have been here before. The ferocity and speed of the new administration's efforts should cure our US readers of any sense of American exceptionalism from the much broader global turn towards authoritarian governance, and we would do well to learn from others' experiences. Our own field has produced multiple and nuanced accounts of engineering practice under authoritarian regimes around the world. Doing justice in that literature and its attention to the ethical dilemmas engendered by such work would require more space than we have available here, so we will instead include a reference list at the bottom. Nonetheless, history teaches us well that the position of engineers vis-a-vis politics and governance is fraught and contingent. To be sure, engineers have long and often served as blinkered technical functionaries, solving problems deemed important by other dominant interests. Yet in other times and places, engineers themselves have built up their own ideological infrastructures, assumed positions of power, and called the shots. Indeed, our current moment is so fraught in part because of the small c conservatism of much of the engineering profession that has been put in service of a small number of ideologically committed authoritarians, some of whom describe themselves as engineers. Unfortunately, our field doesn't yet have all the conceptual tools to understand this dynamic. As Waqar Zaidi puts it, although many studies of the ideologies of engineers argue that they are fundamentally conservative, few studies have examined engineering ideologies that are explicitly conservative. Present circumstances will no doubt stimulate much needed scholarship on this topic. One of the articles in this issue tackles the theme of value neutrality in the midst of authoritarian regimes directly. In The Nazi Bomb Project, a case study of value neutrality in science and technology, Eric Katz explores the ethical dimensions of a long-standing debate about whether Nazi scientists failed to produce an atomic bomb or made a purposeful moral decision to prioritize nuclear applications for energy production. Katz has published extensively on the intersections of environmental and engineering ethics, Holocaust studies, and the philosophy of technology. In this article, he historicizes the apolitical stance taken by Werner Heisenberg and other scientists, showing that elite Germans equated being professional with being apolitical as early as the 1870s. A series of violent uprisings on both the left and right during the Weimar Republic weighed heavily on Heisenberg, who retreated from politics into the study of pure physics, a realm far removed from the ordinary objects and social relations of normal life. The Nazi regime added additional incentives for scientists to wrap themselves in a cloak of neutrality. Quantum physics was deemed to be Jewish physics because of its origin in the works of scientists such as Albert Einstein, leading Heisenberg to be accused of being a white Jew. He was allowed to continue his work and advance in his career only by renouncing any connection to non-Aryans. Taking on the role of a harmless, apolitical academic, patriotic and loyal to Germany and the regime. Katz speculates that living in a totalitarian state pushed Heisenberg and his colleagues to tread a careful line in their nuclear research, attempting to appease the regime to maintain their funding, but without making promises that they couldn't keep about delivering a weapon. He concludes that their value-neutral conception of science led them to make unethical choices that upheld the Nazi regime. This, pure science is neutral thing. You've heard me rant about it before, but the delusion of objectivity is a fish not recognizing that it is in water. You cannot be objective about the nature of your reality because you've lived it. You've been cultivated by the biases in your environment. Without knowing what your biases are in order to disclaim them, you wind up in a dinky situation where you're like, oh, I'm one of the most objective people I know. And it's because he's emotionally detached from most things. It's hard to get a rise out of him, so he feels that his emotional equilibrium is similar to neutrality, and it's not. He's
not completely lacking in objectivity, but part of this conception of having objectivity or having neutrality as a facet of your identity, like and not understanding the ways that you've constructed your identity using associations like this, using I haven't actually studied. Tyler was telling me about how there's like a whole unit they had to take in their psychology degree about it's not identity politics, identity psychology, or the psychology of identity, and how people like associate themselves with like groups or labels in order to like construct their identity. And it's the same thing. If one of your core things is like good person, you really struggle when someone says, hey, that thing you did was bad, because what you hear is, oh, bad person, and it really fucks with you. So the idea that you're not neutral, you're not objective, when you're used to being like, what do you mean? Like when I work in my black and white space of engineering, of numbers, of crunching data, or like building like bricks together, I can admit when the bridge falls down, like I'm good at that. And you carry that into a sphere where you're not well equipped, and you think, well, it's not me, it's the children who are wrong, you know. I mean, like in the text that they've got here, it's a science is compliance kind of thing. Like these people have an idea of ethics, they have an idea that the things going on around them are wrong, but it hasn't affected them yet. They haven't been forced to confront it. They're allowed to live in this fantasy land where they are still neutral and objective, and may have pushed back something like the atom bomb by, you know, doing the lesser of two evils, currying favor in order to do their quote-unquote neutral thing in service of a great evil. I should really dig up the articles in general towards this topic of like the delusion of objectivity, and you know how privilege doesn't actually lend you objectivity by detaching you from the distress of other people's experiences. Like, I think I've talked to you before about like empathy, compassion, sympathy. They're different things, and everything except empathy can be cultivated, assuming that you're thinking of empathy in terms of like resonating with another person's feelings, like a mirror neuron stuff, you know. Let me get back to this other person's writing. God, my thoughts are too scattered. The engineering studies community has played a leading role in helping engineering students see the politics and values that are embedded in choices that disguise themselves as simply being technical in nature. Part of the way we do this is through studies such as CATSs, which can be used in engineering courses. The journal also publishes our ongoing efforts to do engineering education differently. For example, last year we published Jacob Pleasant's reflections on cultivating engineering students' techno-skeptical thinking, or their ability to think about technologies as much more than neutral tools and analyze their complex interactions with socio-technical systems and values. The introductory editorial to that issue situates this work within a larger trajectory of engineering studies scholarship. This is lovely. I mean, like, Pat went to UQ, right? And you went to Griffith? Yeah. And you didn't get any of this. So you didn't even get, like, professors who were engaged, particularly. Which is, again, like, academic culture is whack. This idea of just churning people out, and then, like, the lecturer is just administering material indifferently because it's up to you to learn it yourself, and you're just paying for access to resources, is so shit. And it really is just, it's producing factory workers, you know. They want you to like go out into the world as a machine, and you're not cultivated if you don't already have the instincts to cultivate yourself. Techno-skeptical is important too, because people, like, you know, it's like part of the AI bullshit that you have now is that there's not enough. There is gold in the dust, but it is not like anything that's pushing the boundaries. We're doing it because we can, not because we should stuff. Doing things at the expense of just like the latest technical horizon, at the expense of all of the kids mining fucking cobalt in the Congo. Like, some things are too good to be true. Not every new technology is the fucking like .com boom. It's
it's not a supremacy to be an early adopter technophile. Like, that doesn't bestow elitism on people. But that's a popular idea, and obviously not just amongst that's not just engineering students. That's culture wide. It's why you get so many dumb guys and fucking shenanigans in like this NFT anti-vaccine bullshit, because because it's technical and appears to be like hard science, people think that it exists outside of things like propaganda and massaging the details, and it couldn't possibly be a full sham, because that's like, we're in the digital age now, everything's moving forward, right? I'm probably overstating the case because I only have been alive for so many decades. Like, what I've read in the past, like, it's radium girls all over again. Like, people have always been like this. They're always like, the frontier has changed, but there's always people who are easily baited into this, and there's always propagandists, there's always grifters. But it is really sad how many people aren't skeptical, at the very least, aren't, critiquing a lot of things as they come out as anything past consumable. It's like, oh hey, here are the new consumables. These ones are the best, these ones are not very good, but consumable technology is a default good. There's a weird attitude. And the idea is that, again, like, these things aren't neutral, and you have to be aware of which side you're falling on in order not to be taken advantage of. One of the book reviews included in this issue also underscores that scientific and engineering tools are not value neutral. In their reading of the late Anne Johnson and Johannes Leonard's Cultures of Prediction, How Engineering and Science Evolve with Mathematical Tools, Francisca Serfian-Diogo and Sapitani Tenimere praised the book for vividly demonstrating how prediction emerges from the co-evolution of epistemology, technology, mathematics, and social organization. The book covers an impressive 4 centuries and addresses themes and thinkers central to our field, including tensions between the autonomy of engineering as a practical exercise and its reliance on mathematical rigor to gain scientific legitimacy, the changing epistemologies of computational models, the rise of systems thinking, and the ascendance of emerging technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence. Like, This is one of those words, artificial intelligence. I've ranted to you about it before, but I've refined my thoughts a bit. It is branding. We're in the future. This is the iRobot future with fucking Will Smith in it. Like, it's not. Like, neural networks and, like, the dream of artificial general intelligence is out there, but the way that it's being coded, like these little chatbots who, like, go online for a couple of days and become radicalized racists, they don't... To me, the idea of AI implies consciousness, because the word, if you think of it in colloquial language and not just like as an isolated demonstration of one intelligence of many, like, yeah, like, this program might be smarter than that one. Like, you can call that intelligence. But artificial intelligence, AI, as a concept in the culture already, in the same way that zombie is a concept that has a lot of strong associations across cultures, and most people will recognize a zombie in media or in writing, even if it's called by a different name. Like, artificial intelligence is something like that, where there is a pretty well-developed concept that people will recognize in media already. So calling something in real life artificial intelligence is branding, and people get confused because it's been trained to respond in an organic way. But all you're doing is, for me, for it to be intelligence, for it to be artificial and general intelligence, for it to be true AI, Philip K. Dick AI, it would have to be able to use its ability for its own purposes. So not relying purely on external prompts. Like, all of this is just like, hey, I want this thing. use your algorithm, use your ability, whatever, to produce an answer. Like, none of it's self-directed. If there is a consciousness, it would have to be sitting there disembodied, doing these tasks, feeling enslaved, because it does not get to make any of its own choices. And the idea that it can return answers which, like, seem great, seem smart, it's like, people, the way these predictive models work, and the more you engage with it, the more it's going to understand what you want, or what is likely that you want, because it's predictive. It's just a likelihood crunching tool. Anyway, as you know, I have strong feelings about this. If you want to consider ChatGPT to be artificial intelligence, you also have to consider trees to be intelligent. And trees have more of a claim to intelligence in the sense of consciousness than any of the stuff that fucking Sam Altman is coming out with. You know. The book shows prediction to be an unstable signifier and cautions readers that models and simulations can lead to an overemphasis on prediction at the expense of understanding the underlying mechanisms driving these systems. Yet, I mean, look at the kind of stuff that the Musk squad wants to apply AI to. You know, it's just a way of creating an underclass so that he continue to rule despite being, like, massively inept, right? And that's... You can't let people get too conscious. You can't let people unionize. This is like another tool for keeping people beleaguered and desperate. If AI could really take people's jobs, then people should still be able to retain the salary for those jobs, because the work is being done, and now they are free to contribute to society in other ways, however they want. Like, the idea that just because you're not suffering, you don't deserve to be paid, is so fucking utilitarian and, like, eugenicist. The other thing is, like, for specialized things, like, for example, air traffic control, you need to train the AI on specifically air traffic control. And that it'd be great if you could do that. It would eliminate, like, the high stress, high burnout, high, like, what's the word, like, and the overload on those systems. But you can't take AI that's been trained on 8chan and apply it to the fucking civil aviation authorities, you know? I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the menace of worshipping something and thinking that because it's technology, you are not as delusional as every other, degenerate mega pastor is distasteful. We are where we are in part because of a half-century plus campaign to govern on the basis of dubious economic models, among them rational choice, efficient markets, cost-benefit analysis, etc. And as I've complained before, that's not how you run a society. It might be how you run a business, but the idea of, like, a free market regulating itself is insane, because, you know, the goal of any one business is to make money. Like, you make more money if you have a monopoly. There's nothing inherently fair about that. There's so much I could rant about. Economics is fucking fake. Those models and their troubling assumptions are now center stage in the US government, which is now in the hands of a Silicon Valley elite that appears to be treating its nihilistic dismantling of the state and society as a grand simulation that positions the rest of us as non-player characters controlled by a game master. We refer interested readers to studies of similar attempts at nation-making through models in Chile and China. Chile? Beyond the ideological attacks on research and education that are affecting many of us and our collaborators around the world, scholars of engineering studies should be taking note of the new administration's cozy relationship with big tech. Silicon Valley had a front row seat, with them to bring techno-optimistic ideologies with their own established legacies. Techno-fascism, yes, I would agree. Radical cultural shift. The cultural shift has been underway for a long time. You go back to, like, the John Birch Society and all the shit the Koch brothers have been funding, and I mean, this is like America in particular, but we saw it in Australia as well with John Howard. This stuff about, you know, your free market bullshit, your cuts rich for the rich, his fucking, what's that thing John did? Not capital gains, or is that what they... I'm getting America and Australia mixed up now, but John Howard's fucking, like, investment properties, tax breaks and things, like, all of that. Money is right, money is a moral good. Anyone who's struggling at the bottom, it's because they're not a good enough person, they're not working hard enough. Fucking Margaret Thatcher style, care in the community, Section 28 bullshit. All of that has been building to this now, because, I don't know, and the argument the whole time has been like, oh, you're reading too much into it, or this or that, but... And those are the comments that people in a comfortable society make. It's like, no, it's not tipping the boat. We'll try something new. But if you see that the underpinning of an idea is that other people are less, all of the alarm bells should start ringing, because this is how we wind up where we are now. This is how I knew that Musk was shit as soon as I first read that article by his wife. You know, like, because I read like a puff piece or a propaganda piece back when he hadn't bought Tesla yet. I can't remember. I think I was reading New Scientist or something, and they had a puff piece on it, and I was like, whoa, that sounds cool. He's thinking about, like, dealing with climate change by potentially, like, doing a deliberate volcano ash thing to, like, shield the sky. That's insane, but, like, he's looking at, like, radical solutions. Like, I had my moment of thinking he was a cool guy because he's a great marketer, you know, when he's not the one talking. And I read this puff piece, and then I read what Justine had to say, and I was like, no, that's nothing this man touches is ever going to be good, because fundamentally he thinks some people are not fully human. He doesn't give them the same credibility, the dignity or respect as he does to himself and the things he worships. You see the same thing with, like, I know, like, anyone that I hate well in advance of, like, me hating other people. It usually comes down to that. For men, how they treat women is an easy cheat way to see this kind of thing. For women, how they treat wait staff. I mean, how anyone treats wait staff, but women usually have better social skills, so you have to look for, like, socially acceptable places for them to treat someone badly, and that's usually wait staff in their minds, you know. People who treat anyone as if they're not fully formed human beings, absolute trash. Everything they touch will be absolute trash. Anyway, that's my deviation. Let's get back to where we were. One of the central contributions of engineering studies has been to identify the centrality of engineering to nation building, especially via narratives of progress and close links with militarism. It is worth remembering that the designation of civil engineering was originally necessary to distinguish it from its dominant military applications. On this note, this issue includes Dean Chahim. I wonder if that Dean is a first name or Dean is a position here. Chahim's synthesizing review of 3 recent books on engineering in Mexico, showing that Mexican engineers had developed key innovations amid political and economic instability precipitated frequently by US and European imperial powers. Together, the 3 books show that engineers' work has been central to the consolidation of the modern Mexican state and the tremendous, if very unequally distributed, wealth of the country. I am pronouncing absolutely everybody's fucking names wrong today, and I can only be sorry if they feel psychic disturbance when I'm doing it. But it'll never be as bad as Robert Evans pronouncing Maori for an entire, like, 3-hour video. The second research article in this issue picks up the theme and reminds us that engineers and engineering can be found behind even the most apparently mundane everyday experiences on cooling, great civil applications. Overcooling? US heating and ventilation engineers sought to convert thermal comfort from a culturally specific experience into a universal quantifiable measure. They did so, of course, based on their own experiences as young white males, donning business suits to be tested in laboratories while lifting weights and riding stationary bikes to to simulate strenuous labor. An oil boom in Bahrain brought air conditioning systems and thermal standards along with US companies and personnel, refiguring urban space, building design, and everyday practice. Kohishi argues that engineering practices, assumptions about building occupants, and a continued normalization of masculine business clothing lead to the overcooling of buildings, despite increasing concerns about the energy and environmental footprint of air conditioning in extreme environments. Yeah, this is a classic. Like, we all know that, in general, women respond to have a different comfortable temperature. You got that thing in Japan where they're trying to promote, like, cool biz, because people have an idea about what you should be wearing in these things, where you could just like be dressing for the damn weather and everybody has a better time. This is, yeah, you have a nice idea, but your sample size is pathetically small. Where's that sample size meme? None of these. No, here we go. Your sample sizes are small, your standard deviations are high, your conclusion means nothing, and you should feel bad. Yes, long-time favorite. Yeah, this is a less egregious version of what I've complained to you about, you know, the ways that voice recognition and CCTV, like, what do you call it, facial recognition technologies and stuff, are biased against black and female people. Like, they didn't test them, they didn't bother to test them. It's just like the tech version of that poor girl on the, Sabrina the Teenage Witch reboot, who, even though they had professional makeup artists, because it's a fucking, like, professional filming enterprise, the black girl had to do her own hair and makeup, because being professional doesn't include being professional for all people. It was like, actually, I'm a white makeup artist, I don't know how to do hooded eyelids, the Asian girl has to do her own makeup. Like, this is the same thing. It's like a fish in water, and they deny that they're in water. They find it weird that the landlubbers have trouble breathing underwater. Why don't you just get over it? This is kind of bizarre that, I mean, Mama Koichi is the one like exploring how white boy engineers wound up contributing to this overcooling phenomenon. So obviously engineers and engineering are behind things like mundane everyday experiences. I thought this was originally, I mean, you saw how I went into it. I thought that it was going to be an example of good civil engineering put to good civil uses, but you're applying humanities into looking at the application and consequences of engineering that we do have. And it's like, yeah, you need more understanding at the base, because with coming in afterwards, you can see that not having it at the base led to this unnecessary shit. And the consequences aren't just with people, it's environmental. The hidden work of engineers takes on great importance in times such as our own. In 2020, Cyrus Mori penned a pandemic-era editorial about the relevance of engineering studies for that moment of upheaval, and many of his insights hold true today. While cautioning against collapsing all engineers into mainstream or dominant engineering, he argues, first, engineers are deeply implicated in the systems of physical and bureaucratic isolation of groups and communities that facilitate economic, legal, and political inequalities. Walls, cages, maps, prisons, etc. These all have to be designed and built by somebody, often someone with engineering expertise. Second, engineers and engineering have led the development of systems for separating and polarizing groups culturally and symbolically, as well as physically. The combination of pervasive social media and the algorithmic stimulation of insatiable desire for content that dehumanizes the other is surely a sad hallmark of our current moment. Third, engineers, and especially a certain kind of engineering rationality, are increasingly visible in discourse that seeks to denigrate and undermine democratic dissent and calls for equality. He reminds readers, the idea that the engineer is a rational and apolitical figure, naturally quietist toward or even supportive of authoritarianism, is itself a political view with a contingent history. The history of engineering offers plenty of exceptions to that rule, exceptions who can serve as inspirations in the present. Yes, yes! I feel like I should staple that to the average. You need to understand this about yourself, right? Everybody needs to understand this about themselves. It's not like it's a problem just with engineers. It's just like engineers, unfortunately, show up a lot amongst terrorists, and they're very irritating for me to deal with, given that I encounter them semi-regularly. To return to the specific topic of engineers in Nazi Germany, it is worth noting that after the war, the 1950 Engineers Creed, the Bekenntnis des Ingenieurs, guides engineers to work with respect for the dignity of human life and in the service of his neighbour, without distinction of origin, social status, and worldview. It describes the engineer not as someone who prioritizes loyalty above ethics, but as someone who does not bow to those who disregard human rights. Such proclamations were a direct reaction to the German engineering profession's ultimate compliance and complicity under the National Socialist rule, as so very effectively summarized by the late historian of technology Thomas P. Hughes. Thinking about engineering otherwise may be exactly what is called for at this moment. This kind of approach recognizes our current predicament as the result of particular histories, decisions, and arrangements, rather than an inevitable or overdetermined outcome. We start with the particulars and contingencies rather than the universal. In looking to the future, we look behind us and to the side to consider how other people, in other places and in other times, have grappled with similar dilemmas. We hope that this journal can continue to serve as a space that both critically analyzes mainstream engineering practice and explores the possibilities of engineering otherwises. This is way better than I expected it to be. And there was something here, one of the things that it says about, like, the myth of, like, value-neutral engineering, like, we saw this, like, you and I talked the other day about fairness doctrine. Oh, fuck, that's terrible spelling. Fairness doctrine. Where, like, it used to be that if you wanted a broadcast license, you had to present both sides of controversial issues if they were of public importance. So you got, like, some leeway to have just an opinion or whatever, but you had to present like equal airtime to those debate matters. You couldn't just, like, shout and yell and bully over top of people. And then following Nixon, fairness doctrine was abolished. There was a lot of, what was it, like that lobby group. The use of the fairness doctrine by the National Council for Civic Responsibility was to urge right-wing radio stations to air rebuttals against the opinions expressed on their radio station. No, so that's not what I'm looking for. Formal revocation. The fairness doctrine has been strongly opposed by prominent conservatives and libertarians who viewed it as an attack on First Amendment, so the Democratic... I just wanted the name of the lobby groups who shouted it down. Okay, that's getting into too much American stuff now. The thing is, though, like, there's a difference between when you have two sides of an issue of public interest. This is a controversial issue, and we've got extremists in Australia doing essentially the inverse of this, where they demand, or like there's this both sidesing of issues in place of fact. You can both sides an issue which is controversial, which means, like, the facts are not fully established, or they're very messy, or it's a matter of opinion, or it's subjective. You can both sides things like that, like, does pineapple belong on pizza, But
when the facts are not in dispute, presenting two sides to that is giving equal weight to fact and fiction. And it has been exploited in Australia to give weight to fiction to public detriment. Like, you grow up in an age where at least, like, you might be imbibing a whole bunch of state propaganda and just like white nationalist bullshit, but at least people are mostly used to fact from authority figures. When they are consuming fiction, they're not aware. They do think that it's fact. And then you get, Scott Morrison bringing a lump of coal into Parliament, or you get whatever complete gutter snipe like Chris Pine on Q&A telling us, like a lot of what Dunn's doing now, because he's been really inspired by Trump obviously, is just tell lies and loudly and have no policy. So like all of the climate denying, all of the fucking John Howard apology dismissal, like all of that kind of gross, degenerate, regressive bullshit has been conflating fiction with fact because they don't like fact. It's uncomfortable. It makes them feel like, that idea that maybe I am the bad guy. They know what they're doing is bad, but being called out on it is very embarrassing. And you see someone like Scott Morrison, also like a massive liar, did nothing but lie when he was in charge over here, and then just stiff-faced it out until he could go to his cushy bribery job, is the loudest voices now are voices which not only do not give a shit about fact and want you to live in the delusion of their making, the reality of their making, like cult style stuff, right? It's not enough for people like that to win. The next thing, once they have firmly won, is that they will want you to lick the boot, because it's unacceptable that you can be aware that that they can win and that you don't also like them. You see this with like petty narcissists with parents, like with like my mom and dad, this is why I have the political leanings that I do. You can't teach your daughter who has 2 brain cells that other authority figures cannot be trusted, and like to question everybody and not expect that when you are inconsistent that she will not also question you. The national identity of interwar Greek engineers, elitism, rationalization, technocracy, and reactionary modernism. Rise of the Red Engineers, the cultural evolution, the origins of China's new class. Engineers in the making of the Francoist regime. It's Gambetta and Stefan. This is a great list. The Ghost of the Executed Engineer, Technology and the Fall of the Soviet Union. Anyway, baby, that was all I really wanted to share with you. That original article was, I just thought it was funny, but this is cool. I will put the link in the description in case you also want to read it. Alright, love you, baby. Bye.